Hey everyone, this isn't my normal format of videos, and I do actually have a script I'm reading off of on the side here at the moment, so I hope you can bear with me for this one. I would like to start off by noting that every video from this point on for this channel will be captured, created, performed, and edited primarily using the Linux operating system, specifically the Linux Mint and Bazzite distros on the computers that I have here, and the ones that you can see just on the screen here as well. Now, the reasons for this shift cover a few items that I wanted to mention. The first is because Windows 11 and Microsoft, to an extent, is just continuously getting worse and worse over time. I've seen noticeable performance issues creep up on my computer, and reinstallation after reinstallation of Windows happens, but it only lends itself to disappointment when items as simple as your file explorer just become so painfully slow. Not to mention the constant ads on the home screen of a paid operating system, mind you, and the bombardment of the use of Microsoft Edge for internet settings. It just ended up driving me nuts. The increased pricing on services like the Xbox Game Pass was just another reason to get out of the Microsoft ecosystem, and their big push for AI is a concern for me as well. Implementation of AI applications like Copilot onto the operating system itself without the obvious avenue to disable or not request items like this is pretty appalling from a company with the resources like Microsoft. Thus, for a number of years now, I've been back and forward with using Bazzite and Windows on my Asus ROG Ally. This is the original one, not the Ally X or the Xbox Ally X or anything like that, mainly because the Steam Deck at the time wasn't available in Australia. At the time, the Asus ROG Armory Crate software to manage the drivers and access to games across the multiple platforms, it was terrible. Thus, to try and get some more performance out of the device, I got encouraged by a friend to give Bazzite a try. So with that, I reformatted the device using Bazzite, not dual booting or anything like that, and tried to use it as the only operating system on it. By default, for the ROG Ally ISO, it boots into what's called the Steam Game Mode, and that's what the Steam Deck uses as well under SteamOS. It took a while to get used to, and there were multiple settings and differences between Linux and Windows that I had to get used to. Understanding the differences with the game mode and the desktop mode, a lot of finicky stuff like that basically you kind of had to iron out as you go along. However, once these items were sort of ironed out and I started using it a bit more, figuring out how I could get games that I brought through the Epic Games Store or GOG platforms into it using the Heroic Games launcher and adding them to Steam that way, it made me begin to realize the potential of this operating system. Understanding Proton and how it's a type of compatibility layer to be able to play Windows-built games and having them run in some cases even better on Bazzite, like in the cases of Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart and Clair Obscur Expedition 33, after a bit of tweaking, that was pretty cool. And then we start getting into the space a bit more and seeing other user benchmarks for battery life and performance for other games and similar hardware devices to the one I had. And these were a whole bunch of different benchmarks and scenarios that I just lost entire afternoons to. And setting that device up for travel scenarios where I wouldn't be able to troubleshoot it as I normally would ended up being a really good test to showcase how useful and how much time and dedication people had into optimizing and getting the most out of their hardware. Now, that isn't to say that Linux doesn't have its roadblocks. There were a number of items stopping me from making the switch over initially. To start with, anti-cheat. A lot of games like Battlefield 6, Call of Duty, and other Riot games like Valorant, for example, they're just out of the question on Linux. Unfortunately, the software used to prevent cheating in these types of games is built for Windows and often installs at the kernel level, and it's simply not compatible with Linux. graphics drivers for my hardware were also an issue. Taking multiple attempts and optimizations set up to get the relevant files, or drivers rather, and make sure that games were using the dedicated GPU. That was a bit tricky to set up when this wouldn't necessarily be a huge task for me in Windows. Linux Mint makes this a bit easier to see and select the relevant hardware, but in Bazzite ISOs outside of the ROG Ally build, it just wasn't possible for me to figure it out. On the topic of compatibility, I had trouble getting some games to work, like Silent Hill 4 The Room, and some other games like Spyro, the Reignited trilogy, had issues running with the setup that I currently have. It can be a bit of a deal breaker as well, especially for someone like me who is relatively new to this sort of space. In some particular cases, like Rust as well, where the game can run, but it only allows for joining unofficial servers since the developers stopped supporting Linux. This can be a huge turnoff for a lot of people. And this leads nicely into my confidence and ability to use these different types of operating systems. So at the end of the day, Linux Mint and Bazzite, they're both free open source operating systems for anyone to download and use how they see fit. And a lot of the software on these operating systems comes from larger communities that build upon each of them. The level of trust in the use and installation of the software you get also has to be realized, and you have to be willing to accept that risk to gain practical use of the software. The level of trust is going to vary from person to person. That's not to say that all Windows software is legit by comparison, but you will find yourself leaning towards the communities of each distro to help get the most out of it. Personally speaking, this can be quite daunting to think about when jumping in for the first time, but there are exceptionally dedicated people continuously working on and improving the safety and reliability of the operating systems and the software available to users. And as always, doing your research before downloading and using a piece of software can save you time and headaches down the track. But it's worth mentioning that bad apples appear on trees everywhere, so you take this how you will. Now, full disclosure, there are still some services that I will need to use from time to time, like OneDrive for example, and the online Microsoft suite of products to work on items personally and to help support my family and friends on their computers as well. So I can't say that this is a full transition to Linux overall. However, I think it is a step in the right direction to not only increase my confidence in using different computing systems, or operating systems rather, but also getting the most out of the hardware that I have, and starting what will hopefully trigger a growing snowball effect of more companies realizing that Linux is here and it's here to stay, and it's becoming more and more accessible and usable each and every day. It will be something more people will end up turning to if companies like Microsoft become more complacent in their positions in the market. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about the switch over to Linux. Thank you everyone for listening to me yap on about my limited experience with it all. I hope this has been helpful to you in some form and might get you thinking as to how you might be able to use Linux to your benefit as I have done. I'll leave my references and videos that I used to get going in the description, and a rough transcript of the video will be in there as well. Thank you, and bye-bye!